The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Windsor Castle as King Charles III stood by his office window, watching his daughter-in-law Catherine walk with her children along the rose-lined pathway. Something had shifted in recent months, something he couldn't quite name but felt deeply in his bones. The woman who had once been simply William's girlfriend, then his wife, had evolved into something far more significant for the monarchy, and, surprisingly, for Charles himself. Catherine moved with a grace that reminded him of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II, but with a warmth that was entirely her own. She knelt down to help young Prince Louis tie his shoelace, her laugh carrying on the morning breeze as Charlotte raced ahead with George. There was something magnetic about her presence, something that drew people in and made them feel at ease. Charles had noticed it during their recent public engagements together, the way crowds responded to her with genuine affection rather than mere duty. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. When Catherine first joined the family, Charles had been polite but distant, focused primarily on his own children and his long-awaited ascension to the throne. She was William's choice, and while he approved of her character and background, she remained somewhat peripheral to his immediate concerns. Camilla had been his primary focus then, his partner in preparing for their future roles as king and queen consort. But cancer had a way of changing perspectives, of stripping away pretenses and revealing what truly mattered. During his treatment, when the weight of mortality pressed heavily upon his shoulders, Charles had begun to see Catherine differently. She had visited him regularly, not with the formal duty expected of a daughter-in-law but with genuine care and concern. She brought him books she thought he might enjoy, shared stories about the children that made him smile even on his darkest days, and most importantly, she listened without judgment when he voiced his fears about the future of the monarchy. It was during one of these visits that Charles first noticed the subtle shift in palace dynamics. Catherine had arrived to find him struggling with a particularly difficult decision about a constitutional matter. Rather than offering empty reassurances, she had asked thoughtful questions, demonstrating an understanding of the complexities involved that surprised him. Her insights were practical yet sensitive to tradition, showing a grasp of statecraft that had developed quietly over her years in the family. Meanwhile, Camilla seemed to be pulling back from the spotlight that had once seemed so important to her. The woman who had fought so hard for acceptance and recognition was now choosing to step aside more frequently, allowing Catherine to take center stage at events where protocol might have once demanded Camilla's presence. It wasn't abdication of duty, but rather a careful recalibration of roles that spoke to a deeper understanding of the monarchy's needs. The change became more apparent during their recent tour of Wales. Charles had specifically requested that Catherine accompany him, despite it being traditional for the queen consort to be at his side for such occasions. The Welsh people had responded to Catherine with overwhelming enthusiasm, their cheers growing louder whenever she stepped forward to greet children or accept flowers from well-wishers. Charles watched as she switched effortlessly between English and her carefully practiced Welsh phrases, her genuine delight in meeting people evident in every interaction. That evening, as they reviewed the day's events in their private quarters, Charles found himself drawn into longer conversations with Catherine about the monarchy's future. She spoke about modernization not as abandonment of tradition, but as evolution necessary for survival. Her ideas about connecting with younger generations, about making the institution more accessible while maintaining its dignity, resonated with thoughts he had harbored but never fully articulated. Catherine's relationship with his grandchildren also played a role in this shifting dynamic. Charles had always been fond of George, Charlotte, and Louis, but watching Catherine guide them through their royal responsibilities while keeping them grounded had earned his deep respect. She managed to be both a loving mother and a future queen, preparing them for their roles without robbing them of their childhood. It was a balance his own parents had struggled to achieve, and seeing Catherine navigate it so skillfully filled him with admiration and perhaps a touch of envy for what his own children might have experienced with such guidance. The media had begun to notice the change as well. Royal correspondents whispered about the increased frequency of Charles and Catherine's joint appearances, about the easy rapport between them during public events, about the way the king's face lit up when his daughter-in-law approached. Some speculated about tensions with Camilla, but those close to the family understood that something more complex was happening. Camilla herself seemed almost relieved by the shift. The pressure of being the second wife, of constantly proving herself worthy of her position, had taken its toll over the years. As Catherine naturally stepped into a more prominent role, Camilla found herself able to focus on the causes and activities that truly interested her, without the constant scrutiny that came with being the king's primary companion at every event. The palace staff had also begun to adjust their protocols accordingly. When planning events, they increasingly sought Catherine's input alongside the king's, recognizing that her judgment carried significant weight with Charles. Her office, once modest in its scope, had expanded to handle the increased responsibilities that came with her elevated profile. Charles reflected on how his own relationship with his father had been so different. Prince Philip had been a formidable presence, supportive but often stern, focused on duty above personal connection. With Catherine, Charles found himself able to be both a father figure and a colleague, someone who could share the burdens of monarchy while also enjoying genuine friendship. As he continued to watch Catherine with the children in the garden below, Charles realized that what he was witnessing was not just a family moment, but a glimpse of the monarchy's future. In Catherine, he saw not just William's wife or his grandchildren's mother, but a woman who understood instinctively what the institution needed to thrive in the modern world. The shift in his attention toward her wasn't personal favoritism, but rather recognition of her unique ability to bridge the gap between tradition and progress, between the formal requirements of royal duty and the human connections that made monarchy meaningful to ordinary people. The private dining room at Clarence House felt unusually quiet, as Camilla sat across from her closest friend, Annabel Elliot. The china teacups clinked softly against their saucers, the only sound breaking the contemplative silence that had settled between the two women. Annabel had noticed the change in Camilla's demeanor over recent weeks, a subtle withdrawal that seemed at odds with her typically confident and engaging personality. Camilla stirred her tea thoughtfully, her gaze fixed on the delicate pattern of roses adorning the cup's rim. She had always been a woman who spoke her mind, who fought for her place in a world that had often seemed determined to exclude her. But lately she found herself choosing silence more often, stepping back from situations where she might once have asserted her presence with characteristic determination. The change had been gradual at first, so subtle that even those closest to her might have missed it. It began with small gestures, declining invitations to certain events where her presence wasn't strictly necessary, suggesting that Catherine might be better suited for particular engagements. What started as practical decisions had evolved into a pattern of strategic withdrawal that few outside the inner circle had yet recognized. Annabel finally broke the silence, her voice gentle but probing. She had known Camilla for decades, had stood by her through the darkest periods of public scrutiny, and she could sense when her friend was struggling with internal conflicts. The conversation that followed revealed the complex emotions Camilla had been grappling with as she watched the dynamics within the royal family shift around her. The public had never made acceptance easy for Camilla. Even after her marriage to Charles, even after years of dedicated service and gradual warming of public opinion, she remained acutely aware of her position as an outsider who had worked her way inside. The constant scrutiny had taught her to read the subtle signs of favor and disapproval, to understand when the winds of change were beginning to blow in a different direction. She had noticed Charles's increased attention to Catherine, of course. It would have been impossible to miss the way his eyes followed his daughter-in-law during public events, the frequency with which he sought her opinions on matters both trivial and significant. What surprised Camilla was not that it was happening, but how little resentment she felt about it. Instead, there was an odd sense of relief, as if a burden she hadn't fully acknowledged carrying was finally being lifted from her shoulders. The role of queen consort had never been one Camilla had originally aspired to. Her love for Charles was genuine and deep, but the institutional requirements that came with their union had always felt somewhat foreign to her nature. She was a woman who preferred intimate gatherings to grand ceremonies, who found more satisfaction in one-on-one conversations than in addressing crowds of thousands. The public role, while she had performed it dutifully, had never felt as natural as it appeared to be for Catherine. Watching Catherine navigate royal duties with apparent ease had been both humbling and illuminating for Camilla. The younger woman possessed qualities that seemed perfectly suited to modern monarchy, an ability to connect with people across generational and cultural divides that Camilla admired, but knew she could never fully replicate. Catherine's background, her long courtship with William, her gradual introduction to royal life, had prepared her in ways that Camilla's more unconventional path had not. The contrast became particularly evident during their recent joint engagement at a children's hospital. Camilla had watched as Catherine moved effortlessly between the bedsides of young patients, her genuine warmth creating moments of joy even in such difficult circumstances. While Camilla had her own strengths and had developed meaningful relationships with various charities over the years, she recognized that Catherine possessed a particular gift for this type of public engagement. The realization hadn't come as a shock or betrayal, but rather as a gradual acknowledgement of changing circumstances. Camilla had fought so hard for recognition and acceptance during the early years of her relationship with Charles that she had perhaps lost sight of what truly brought her fulfillment. Now, with that recognition finally achieved and her position secure, she found herself questioning whether the spotlight was really where she wanted to remain. Her conversations with Charles about these shifting dynamics had been surprisingly open and honest. He had reassured her of his love and respect, had emphasized that her withdrawal from certain public roles didn't diminish her importance in his life or in the monarchy. But she could also sense his genuine enthusiasm for Catherine's growing involvement, his excitement about the fresh perspective and energy she brought to their work. Rather than fighting this change or viewing it as a threat to her own position, Camilla had begun to see it as an opportunity for reinvention. She started focusing more intensively on the causes that genuinely passionate her, particularly her work with literacy programs and support for victims of domestic violence. These areas allowed her to use her experience and wisdom in ways that felt more authentic than the broader, ceremonial duties that now seemed to suit Catherine better. The media speculation about tensions between the two women frustrated Camilla but didn't surprise her. The press had always been eager to create narratives of rivalry and conflict within the royal family, particularly among the women. The reality was far more nuanced and mature than such stories suggested. Camilla had developed genuine respect for Catherine over the years, appreciation for her dedication to family and duty, and recognition of her unique talents. Their relationship had evolved from one of polite formality to something approaching genuine friendship. They had different strengths and different approaches to their roles, but these differences complemented rather than competed with each other. Camilla's experience and institutional knowledge proved valuable to Catherine as she took on increased responsibilities, while Catherine's fresh ideas and modern perspective helped Camilla see new possibilities for her own work. The children played a significant role in this dynamic as well. Camilla had never been a natural with young children in the way that Catherine was, but she had found her own way of connecting with George, Charlotte, and Louis. She enjoyed being the slightly unconventional grandmother figure, the one who might allow them small indulgences their parents would frown upon, who could share stories about their grandfather that revealed his more human side. As the afternoon progressed and her conversation with Annabelle continued, Camilla found herself articulating thoughts she had been processing privately for months. The withdrawal from the spotlight wasn't retreat or defeat, but rather a conscious choice to focus her remaining years on activities that brought her genuine satisfaction and allowed her to contribute meaningfully without the constant pressure of public performance. She spoke about her relief at no longer feeling the need to prove herself constantly, about the freedom that came with stepping back from certain expectations. The woman who had once been painted as ambitious and calculating was discovering the peace that came with choosing substance over visibility, with prioritizing personal fulfillment over public recognition. The soft morning light filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine reviewed the day's schedule with her private secretary. What had once been a manageable list of engagements and meetings had grown considerably over recent months, reflecting her expanded role within the royal family structure. Each addition to her calendar represented not just increased responsibility, but also growing recognition of her unique position in the monarchy's evolution. Catherine had always been methodical in her approach to royal duties, but lately she found herself thinking more strategically about each engagement. The conversation she'd had with King Charles the previous week continued to resonate in her mind. He had spoken about legacy, about ensuring the monarchy remained relevant and connected to the people it served. His words carried the weight of someone who understood that his reign, beginning later in life than most, would be defined not just by his own actions but by the foundation he laid for future generations. The evolution of her relationship with her father-in-law had been one of the most unexpected aspects of her royal journey. In the early years of her marriage to William, their interactions had been pleasant but formal, bounded by protocol and mutual respect, but lacking the warmth that had since developed. The change had been gradual, built through shared experiences, and growing mutual appreciation for each other's perspectives on the challenges facing the modern monarchy. Charles had begun seeking her input on matters that surprised even her own staff. Constitutional questions that might once have been discussed exclusively with senior advisors now included Catherine in the conversation. Her insights, shaped by her unique position as someone who had entered the royal family as an adult and observed its workings with fresh eyes, proved valuable in ways that traditional palace wisdom sometimes missed. The king's illness had accelerated this shift in their dynamic. During his treatment and recovery, Catherine had found herself taking on responsibilities that went beyond her official role. She represented the family at events where both Charles and William were unavailable, handled sensitive diplomatic situations with a skill that impressed seasoned courtiers, and demonstrated an intuitive understanding of when to follow protocol and when to adapt it to serve broader purposes. Her approach to these expanded duties reflected lessons learned during her years of preparation for royal life. Unlike those born into the family, Catherine had experienced life as a private citizen and retained an understanding of how the monarchy appeared to ordinary people. This perspective allowed her to identify opportunities for connection and modernization that might be overlooked by those immersed in royal tradition from birth. The public response to her increased visibility had been overwhelmingly positive. Opinion polls consistently showed Catherine ranking among the most popular members of the royal family, with approval ratings that reflected genuine affection rather than mere respect for her position. Young people in particular responded to her authenticity and relatability, seeing in her someone who bridged the gap between their world and the ancient institution of monarchy. This popularity hadn't gone unnoticed within palace walls. Senior courtiers who had initially viewed Catherine as simply another royal spouse were beginning to recognize her as a significant asset in their efforts to maintain the monarchy's relevance in the 21st century. Her natural ability to connect with diverse audiences, combined with her growing confidence in handling complex situations, made her an invaluable member of the royal team. Catherine's relationship with the media had also evolved significantly. Early in her royal career, she had been cautious and somewhat uncomfortable with the intense scrutiny that came with her position. Years of experience had taught her how to manage media attention more effectively, using it to highlight causes she supported while maintaining appropriate boundaries around her family's privacy. The causes she championed reflected both personal passion and strategic thinking about the monarchy's role in addressing contemporary challenges. Her work on early childhood development had expanded from personal interest to comprehensive advocacy that influenced government policy and public discourse. Her mental health initiatives, developed in partnership with William and Harry, had helped reduce stigma around psychological wellness and demonstrated the royal family's relevance to pressing social issues. These successes had earned Catherine respect not just from the public but from political leaders and policy experts who recognized the genuine impact of her advocacy. Prime ministers and cabinet ministers sought her involvement in initiatives related to her areas of expertise, understanding that her participation could significantly amplify their reach and effectiveness. The balancing act between her public role and private life as a mother remained Catherine's greatest challenge, and perhaps her most significant achievement. She had managed to raise 3 children who appeared remarkably normal despite their extraordinary circumstances, protecting their childhood while gradually preparing them for their future responsibilities. This aspect of her life particularly impressed Charles, who had struggled with similar challenges during William and Harry's upbringing. Her partnership with William had also strengthened as their roles within the royal hierarchy evolved. They had learned to coordinate their activities to maximize their impact while maintaining their individual identities and interests. The easy rapport between them during public appearances reflected genuine collaboration rather than mere performance, demonstrating to the public that their marriage remained strong, despite the pressures of royal life. The international dimension of Catherine's role had expanded significantly as well. Foreign leaders and diplomats increasingly sought meetings with her during state visits, recognizing her influence within the royal family and her ability to connect with diverse audiences. Her presence at diplomatic events added a dimension of soft power that traditional diplomatic channels couldn't replicate. Within the Commonwealth, Catherine's appeal transcended cultural and generational boundaries in ways that impressed even experienced diplomats. Her visits to Commonwealth nations generated enthusiasm that strengthened ties between Britain and these important partners, demonstrating the continued relevance of the royal family in maintaining these crucial relationships. The palace machinery had adapted to accommodate Catherine's expanded role, with her office growing in size and sophistication, to handle the increased demands of her schedule. New staff members brought expertise in areas that reflected her evolving responsibilities, from policy analysis to digital communications, ensuring that her activities were supported by professional competence that matched her growing influence. Catherine herself had grown more confident in expressing her views on matters of public policy, while remaining carefully within the constitutional boundaries that defined her role. She had learned to use her platform to highlight issues and perspectives without crossing into partisan political territory, a skill that required constant calibration, but one she had mastered through experience and careful guidance from constitutional experts. The transformation hadn't been without its challenges. The increased scrutiny and responsibility sometimes felt overwhelming, particularly when balanced against her desire to maintain some semblance of normal family life. There were moments when the weight of expectations and the complexity of navigating royal protocol while staying true to her own values created stress that tested her resilience. Yet Catherine had found ways to manage these pressures while continuing to evolve in her role. Her growing relationship with Charles provided both support and guidance, while her partnership with William offered the stability and shared understanding that made their expanded responsibilities manageable. Together, they were creating a model for modern royal leadership that honored tradition while embracing necessary change. The ancient stones of Buckingham Palace had witnessed countless conversations that shaped the course of British history, but the meeting taking place in the King's private study on this grey London afternoon carried particular significance for the future of the monarchy. Charles sat across from his son William, the papers spread between them detailing plans for the next phase of royal engagements and the subtle but important shift in how responsibilities would be allocated among family members. William had requested this private meeting after observing the changes in family dynamics over recent months. As heir apparent, he understood better than most the delicate balance required to maintain both tradition and evolution within the royal framework. The conversation ahead would address questions that had been developing gradually, but now demanded clear understanding and agreement between father and son. The relationship between Charles and William had not always been smooth. The difficulties of Charles's marriage to Diana, the very public breakdown of that relationship, and the tragedy of Diana's death had created complications that took years to resolve. William's protective instincts toward his mother's memory and his own grief had sometimes put him at odds with his father's choices, particularly regarding Camilla's place in their family. Time and maturity had healed many of these wounds. William had come to understand his father's perspective more clearly, while Charles had worked to repair the emotional distance that had grown between them during William's younger years. The birth of William's children had provided additional common ground, with Charles embracing his role as grandfather with an enthusiasm that surprised those who remembered his sometimes distant relationship with his own sons during their childhood. Now, facing each other in the comfortable but formal setting of the King's study, both men understood they were discussing more than just scheduling and protocol. They were negotiating the future distribution of influence within the royal family, acknowledging changes that were already underway, while ensuring they proceeded in ways that strengthened rather than divided the institution they both served. William began by expressing his observations about Catherine's expanding role and the positive public response to her increased visibility. He had watched his wife grow into her royal responsibilities with pride and admiration, but he was also protective of her well-being and concerned about the sustainability of continued expansion of her duties. The conversation allowed him to gauge his father's intentions and ensure that any changes served the monarchy's long-term interests rather than short-term convenience. Charles listened carefully to his son's concerns while sharing his own perspective on Catherine's unique qualities and the opportunities her growing influence created for the monarchy. He spoke about the need for fresh approaches to traditional challenges, about the importance of connecting with younger generations who might otherwise become disconnected from the institution. In Catherine, he saw someone who could bridge generational gaps while maintaining the dignity and continuity that formed the monarchy's foundation. The discussion touched on Camilla's role and her apparent willingness to step back from certain high-profile duties. Both men acknowledged Camilla's valuable contributions to the royal family and her continued importance in Charles's personal life, while recognizing that her strategic withdrawal from some public activities created space for Catherine's expanded involvement. The transition was being managed carefully to avoid any appearance of conflict or displacement. William expressed appreciation for his stepmother's grace in handling these changes. His relationship with Camilla had evolved significantly since his father's remarriage, growing from initial resistance to genuine respect and affection. He understood that her decision to reduce her public profile in certain areas reflected wisdom and institutional loyalty rather than any sense of rejection or failure. The conversation also addressed practical concerns about workload distribution and the need to ensure that Catherine's expanded role didn't compromise her effectiveness as a mother or her partnership with William. The experiences of previous generations had demonstrated the importance of maintaining family stability while meeting public duties, and both men were determined to learn from past mistakes. Charles shared his vision for the monarchy's future, painting a picture of an institution that remained rooted in tradition while adapting to contemporary needs and expectations. He spoke about the importance of each family member finding their optimal contribution to this larger purpose, using their individual strengths to serve the collective mission. In this framework, Catherine's growing prominence wasn't favoritism, but strategic deployment of talent and capability. They discussed the constitutional implications of the changes they were observing and implementing. While the fundamental principles of monarchy remained unchanged, the practical distribution of responsibilities and public representation could evolve to meet changing circumstances. The key was ensuring that any changes strengthened public support for the institution while maintaining its essential character and functions. William raised concerns about the media's tendency to create narratives of competition and conflict within the royal family. They agreed on the importance of managing public perceptions carefully, ensuring that Catherine's increased profile was understood as institutional strengthening rather than evidence of internal power struggles. The success of any transition would depend partly on how effectively they could control and shape the public narrative around these changes. The international implications of royal family dynamics also featured in their discussion. Foreign governments and diplomatic partners paid close attention to the relative prominence of different family members, interpreting changes as signals about Britain's priorities and the monarchy's direction. Catherine's growing international profile needed to be managed in ways that supported rather than complicated Britain's diplomatic objectives. Both men acknowledged the unique pressures that came with Catherine's position as someone who had married into the royal family rather than being born into it. Her perspective as an outsider who had successfully integrated into the institution was valuable, but it also required careful support to ensure she remained comfortable with her expanding role. The conversation included discussion of additional resources and support structures that might be needed as her responsibilities continued to grow. The question of timing emerged as particularly important. While the evolution in family roles was already underway, formalizing or accelerating these changes required careful consideration of various factors, including public readiness, institutional stability, and the personal capacity of those involved. Both men agreed that gradual, organic development was preferable to dramatic announcements or sudden shifts that might create uncertainty or controversy. William's protective instincts toward his wife were evident throughout the conversation, but so was his recognition of her exceptional capabilities and her positive impact on the monarchy's public standing. He wanted to ensure that any expansion of her role was sustainable and aligned with her own wishes and well-being, rather than simply responding to external pressures or expectations. The discussion concluded with agreement on general principles that would guide future decisions about family roles and responsibilities. They established frameworks for ongoing communication about these evolving dynamics, ensuring that changes would continue to be managed collaboratively rather than unilaterally. Most importantly, they reaffirmed their shared commitment to strengthening the monarchy for future generations while honoring the service and sacrifice of those who had maintained the institution through previous challenges. As William left his father's study, both men carried with them a clearer understanding of the path ahead and confidence that the changes they were managing would ultimately serve the monarchy's long-term interests. The conversation had addressed immediate concerns while establishing foundations for continued adaptation and growth in the years to come. The transformation had become impossible to ignore by the time of the annual Commonwealth service at Westminster Abbey. As the royal family processed down the ancient nave, the eyes of the congregation, media, and millions of television viewers worldwide were drawn not just to King Charles in his ceremonial robes, but to Catherine walking with a confidence and presence that seemed to command attention effortlessly. The symbolism wasn't lost on royal watchers who had spent years analyzing the subtle choreography of such events. Behind the scenes, palace staff had been quietly adjusting protocols and procedures to accommodate what had become an undeniable shift in the royal hierarchy's practical functioning. Private secretaries coordinated schedules with an awareness that Catherine's availability had become as crucial as the king's for many significant events. Her opinions were sought not just on matters related to her specific charitable interests, but on broader questions of royal strategy and public engagement. The change was particularly evident in how international visitors and dignitaries were received at palace events. Foreign ambassadors and heads of state increasingly requested meetings with Catherine, recognizing her growing influence within the royal structure. These requests were accommodated not as courtesy calls, but as substantive diplomatic encounters that contributed meaningfully to Britain's international relationships. Catherine herself had grown more comfortable with this elevated status, though she remained mindful of the delicate balance required to accept increased responsibility, without appearing to overstep boundaries or challenge established hierarchies. Her natural diplomacy served her well in navigating these complex dynamics, allowing her to embrace her expanding role while maintaining harmony within the family structure. The public's perception of these changes had largely been positive, with polling data showing increased support for the monarchy, correlating with Catherine's higher profile. Young people, particularly young women, responded enthusiastically to her prominence, seeing in her a role model who balanced traditional royal duties with modern sensibilities. This demographic shift represented exactly the kind of renewal the monarchy needed to ensure its continued relevance. Media coverage had evolved from speculation about family tensions to recognition of Catherine's genuine contributions to royal effectiveness. Even traditionally Republican publications acknowledged her skill in representing British interests abroad and her ability to connect with diverse audiences at home. The narrative had shifted from questioning her readiness for royal life to celebrating her mastery of its demands. The charitable sector had also responded positively to Catherine's increased visibility. Organizations with which she was associated reported significant increases in public interest, volunteer applications, and donations. Her advocacy for early childhood development had influenced government policy in ways that demonstrated the monarchy's continued capacity to effect positive change in national life. Within the palace walls, longtime staff members had observed with interest how Catherine's rise had been accompanied by a general improvement in workplace atmosphere. Her collaborative approach to problem-solving and genuine interest in the perspectives of people at all levels of the organization had influenced how others approached their duties. The culture of the institution was evolving in positive ways that extended beyond any single individual's actions. Camilla's graceful withdrawal from certain high-profile activities had allowed her to focus more intensively on causes that genuinely inspired her passion. Her work with literacy programs had expanded significantly, and her advocacy for victims of domestic violence had gained new depth and impact. Rather than feeling marginalized, she had found renewed purpose in areas where her experience and perspective were particularly valuable. The relationship between Catherine and Camilla had also evolved during this period of transition. What had begun as mutual respect had developed into something approaching genuine friendship, with each woman appreciating the other's unique contributions to the royal family's mission. Their different backgrounds and approaches to royal duty proved complementary rather than competitive, with both recognizing the value of diversity in serving the monarchy's broad responsibilities. Charles himself had been pleasantly surprised by how naturally these changes had developed. His growing reliance on Catherine's judgment and her increasing prominence in royal activities had emerged organically from practical necessity and genuine capability rather than any predetermined plan. The evolution felt right in ways that forced changes might not have, suggesting that it reflected authentic needs and strengths rather than artificial construction. The impact on family dynamics had been largely positive as well. The children had adapted well to their mother's increased travel and public commitments, supported by William's flexible approach to his own schedule and the broader family's willingness to provide additional support when needed. George, Charlotte, and Louis continued to enjoy remarkably normal childhoods despite their parents' high-profile responsibilities. International observers had noted the smoothness of these transitions with approval. Commonwealth leaders in particular had expressed enthusiasm about Catherine's expanded role, seeing in her someone who could help strengthen ties between Britain and member nations through her unique ability to connect with diverse cultures and generations. The constitutional implications of these changes remained carefully managed within established boundaries. While Catherine's influence had clearly grown, the fundamental structure of monarchy remained unchanged, with Charles retaining ultimate authority and William's position as heir apparent unchallenged. The evolution represented adaptation within tradition rather than revolution against it. Foreign media coverage had generally been positive, with international publications recognizing the skillful way the British royal family was managing generational transition and modernization. The changes were seen as evidence of the monarchy's continued vitality and ability to remain relevant in changing times. Economic analysts had noted the positive impact of Catherine's higher profile on tourism and the broader royal brand. Her fashion choices influenced markets. Her charitable activities attracted international attention to British causes, and her diplomatic activities supported trade and cultural exchange in measurable ways. The success of this transition period had implications for how future changes within the royal family might be managed. The gradual organic approach that had characterized Catherine's rise suggested that evolution rather than revolution was the most effective way to maintain institutional stability while adapting to new circumstances and opportunities. Professional development opportunities had been expanded to ensure that Catherine's staff could effectively support her broadened responsibilities. New expertise in areas like policy analysis, international relations, and digital communications had been added to her team, ensuring that her increased profile was backed by professional competence appropriate to her growing influence. Security arrangements had also been adjusted to reflect Catherine's heightened visibility and international travel schedule. The protection officers assigned to her had been increased and specialized training provided to ensure that her safety was maintained while allowing her to perform her duties effectively. The transformation that had begun as a gradual shift in attention and responsibility had evolved into a fundamental recalibration of royal family dynamics. Catherine's emergence as a central figure in the monarchy's activities represented not just personal success, but institutional adaptation that strengthened the entire structure for future challenges and opportunities. The evening reception at St. James's Palace brought together an influential gathering of world leaders, diplomats, and cultural figures, but the conversations that mattered most were happening in the quieter corners where real relationships were built and maintained. Catherine moved through these interactions with the ease of someone who had learned to balance warmth with dignity, accessibility with appropriate distance. Watching her navigate these complex social dynamics, Charles felt a profound sense of satisfaction about the path the monarchy was taking. The guest list itself reflected Catherine's growing international stature. Prime ministers and presidents had specifically requested her presence at the event, understanding that her participation would add significance to their visit and provide opportunities for the kind of informal diplomacy that formal meetings couldn't always accommodate. Her ability to put people at ease while discussing serious matters had become legendary among diplomatic circles. Earlier that week, Catherine had hosted a private lunch for the wives of Commonwealth leaders, an event that had generated more substantial outcomes than many formal summit meetings. The women had discussed everything from education policy to climate change, finding common ground and developing partnerships that would influence their husbands' official discussions. Such was Catherine's skill in creating environments where meaningful dialogue could flourish. The evening's highlight came when Catherine delivered impromptu remarks about the importance of international cooperation in addressing global challenges. Her words were carefully chosen to remain within constitutional boundaries, while still conveying substantive messages about Britain's values and priorities. The response from the assembled dignitaries was immediate and positive, with several approaching her afterward to discuss potential collaborations. Charles observed these interactions with growing appreciation for Catherine's unique diplomatic gifts. She possessed an ability to make people feel heard and understood, while advancing British interests in ways that traditional diplomatic channels sometimes couldn't achieve. Her authenticity and genuine interest in others created opportunities for connection that formal protocols might otherwise prevent. The transformation in how palace events were planned and executed reflected Catherine's increased importance to the monarchy's operations. Her schedule was now considered as carefully as the king's when major events were being organized, with planners recognizing that her presence or absence could significantly impact an event's success and international reception. Behind the public success, Catherine had also been grappling with the personal challenges that came with her elevated status. The constant scrutiny, the weight of expectations, and the pressure to perform flawlessly in high-stakes situations had tested her resilience in ways she hadn't fully anticipated when she first married into the royal family. Her support system had been crucial in managing these pressures. William remained her closest advisor and strongest advocate, helping her navigate complex situations while ensuring she maintained perspective about what truly mattered. Their marriage had strengthened under the pressure of increased responsibility, with both recognizing that their partnership was essential to their individual and collective success. The relationship with her children had required careful attention as her public profile expanded. George, Charlotte, and Louis needed to understand why their mother was traveling more frequently and why public interest in their family continued to grow. Catherine had worked hard to maintain their sense of normalcy while gradually preparing them for their own future. Roles, professional counseling and coaching, had also played important roles in Catherine's development. Working with experts in communication, protocol, and stress management had helped her develop strategies for maintaining her effectiveness while protecting her well-being. These resources had proven invaluable as she navigated increasingly complex and high-pressure situations. The media's coverage of Catherine's evolution had generally been supportive, but managing public perception remained a constant challenge. Every appearance, every speech, every interaction was analyzed for signs of success or failure, creating pressure to maintain consistently high standards while remaining authentic and relatable. International media attention had grown exponentially with Catherine's increased visibility. Foreign publications regularly featured her activities, and her influence on fashion, culture, and social issues extended far beyond Britain's borders. This global platform brought both opportunities and responsibilities that required careful management. The economic impact of Catherine's prominence had become increasingly significant. Her endorsement of British designers, her promotion of national causes, and her role in attracting international attention to British institutions contributed measurably to the country's soft power and economic interests. Educational institutions had begun requesting Catherine's involvement in their international recruitment efforts, recognizing that her association could attract students and faculty from around the world. Universities competed for her patronage, understanding the prestige and practical benefits that came with royal association. The charitable sector had experienced what analysts called the Catherine effect, with organizations associated with her causes experiencing unprecedented growth in support and resources. Her advocacy had influenced policy discussions at the highest levels of government, demonstrating the monarchy's continued capacity to effect positive change in national life. Technology and social media had played important roles in amplifying Catherine's influence. Her team had developed sophisticated strategies for engaging with digital audiences while maintaining appropriate boundaries and security. The monarchy's online presence had evolved significantly to accommodate her higher profile and broader reach. Fashion industry observers noted that Catherine's choices continued to influence global trends, with her selections often selling out within hours of public appearances. This phenomenon generated economic benefits for British designers and manufacturers, while establishing her as a cultural influencer whose impact extended far beyond traditional royal spheres. Security considerations had evolved to match Catherine's increased international profile and travel schedule. Protection arrangements now required coordination between multiple agencies and countries, with specialized training provided to ensure her safety while allowing her to perform her duties effectively. The cumulative effect of these changes had been a strengthening of the monarchy's position both domestically and internationally. Public approval ratings remained high, with Catherine's popularity contributing significantly to overall support for the institution. Young people, in particular, responded positively to her prominence, suggesting that the monarchy was successfully adapting to serve new generations. Constitutional experts had observed with interest how the monarchy was evolving to accommodate changing circumstances while maintaining its essential character. The changes represented adaptation within tradition, rather than fundamental alteration of the institution's nature or purpose. As the evening reception concluded and the last guests departed, Charles reflected on how far the royal family had come in managing this transition. The evening had demonstrated Catherine's mastery of her expanded role and the positive impact of the changes they had implemented. The monarchy was not just surviving but thriving in its adapted form. The path ahead remained challenging, with continued need for careful balance between tradition and innovation, between public service and private life, between national responsibilities and international opportunities. But the foundation had been laid for continued success, with Catherine's emergence as a central figure providing stability and direction for the future. The final chapter of this remarkable transformation unfolded not with grand announcements or dramatic revelations, but with the quiet satisfaction of watching an organic evolution reach its natural conclusion. On a crisp autumn morning at Balmoral, as golden leaves drifted across the Scottish landscape, the royal family gathered for what had become an annual planning retreat to discuss the year ahead and reflect on the changes they had successfully navigated. Catherine sat at the polished oak table in the castle's library, surrounded by family members and key advisors, her notebook filled with ideas and observations that would shape the monarchy's direction in the coming months. The transformation that had begun with small shifts in attention and responsibility had culminated in a fundamental recalibration of how the royal family functioned as an institution. The statistics spoke for themselves. Public approval ratings for the monarchy had reached levels not seen in decades, with Catherine's popularity consistently ranking among the highest ever recorded for any royal family member. International surveys showed increased positive perception of Britain and its institutions, with Catherine's diplomatic activities contributing measurably to the country's soft power and global influence. More importantly, the monarchy had successfully bridged generational divides that had threatened its long-term viability. Young people who might once have viewed the institution as irrelevant or outdated now saw in Catherine a figure who represented both continuity and progress, tradition and modernity. Her ability to connect with diverse audiences while maintaining royal dignity had proven that the monarchy could evolve without losing its essential character. The changes in family dynamics had stabilized into a new normal that served everyone's interests and capabilities. Charles remained the constitutional monarch, his authority and dignity intact, but his relationship with Catherine had evolved into something approaching a true partnership in royal leadership. Their different generational perspectives and complementary skills created a more effective and responsive royal presence than either could have achieved alone. Camilla had found her perfect niche in the reconfigured family structure. Her reduced public profile had allowed her to focus intensively on causes that genuinely inspired her passion, where her experience and wisdom could have maximum impact. The literacy programs she championed had expanded internationally, and her work with domestic violence survivors had influenced policy changes that saved lives. She had discovered that influence didn't always require visibility. William and Catherine's marriage had emerged stronger from the pressures and opportunities of their elevated roles. They had learned to coordinate their activities to maximum effect, while maintaining their individual identities and interests. Their children continued to thrive, benefiting from the stability their parents provided while gradually understanding their own future, responsibilities. The practical implications of these changes had been successfully integrated into palace operations. Staff structures had evolved to support Catherine's expanded role, with new expertise brought in to handle her increased responsibilities in areas ranging from policy analysis to international relations. The machinery of monarchy had adapted smoothly to accommodate new realities. International relationships had been strengthened through Catherine's diplomatic activities. Commonwealth leaders spoke enthusiastically about their interactions with her, and foreign governments increasingly viewed her as an important channel for communication with Britain. Trade delegations specifically requested her involvement, understanding that her presence could open doors that traditional diplomatic approaches might leave closed. The charitable sector had experienced unprecedented growth in areas associated with Catherine's advocacy. Her focus on early childhood development had influenced government policy and attracted international attention to British research and innovation in this field. Mental health awareness had advanced significantly through her sustained advocacy, with measurable improvements in public attitudes and service provision. Economic analyses showed that Catherine's prominence had generated substantial returns on the public investment in monarchy. Tourism numbers had increased, British fashion exports had grown, and the monarchy's overall contribution to the economy had expanded significantly. The institution was not just culturally and politically valuable, but economically beneficial in measurable ways. The media landscape had adapted to accommodate Catherine's central role in royal activities. International publications regularly featured her activities, and her influence extended far beyond Britain's borders. The coverage had generally been positive, recognizing her genuine contributions to public life, rather than focusing solely on celebrity aspects of her position. Technology and social media strategies had evolved to amplify Catherine's positive impact while maintaining appropriate security and privacy boundaries. The monarchy's digital presence had become more sophisticated and effective, reaching audiences that traditional royal communications had struggled to engage. Constitutional scholars had noted with approval how the monarchy had managed significant change while maintaining its essential character and functions. The evolution represented successful adaptation to contemporary needs, rather than fundamental alteration of the institution's nature. The precedent established could guide future transitions as circumstances continued to evolve. Security arrangements had been upgraded to match Catherine's international profile and travel requirements. Coordination between British and foreign security services had improved, ensuring her safety while allowing her to perform her duties effectively. The investment in protection reflected recognition of her importance to national interests. Educational institutions had benefited significantly from Catherine's patronage and advocacy. British universities reported increased international interest, with Catherine's involvement in recruitment efforts contributing to growth in foreign student enrollment and research partnerships. Her emphasis on education as a tool for social mobility had influenced policy discussions at the highest levels. The transformation had implications extending beyond the immediate royal family. Other European monarchies had observed the British experience with interest, recognizing successful strategies for maintaining relevance while adapting to changing social and political environments. The British model was being studied and adapted by royal institutions worldwide. As the planning session at Balmoral concluded, family members reflected on how far they had traveled from the uncertain days of transition. The changes that had once seemed risky or controversial had proven to be exactly what the monarchy needed to thrive in the modern world. Catherine's emergence as a central figure had strengthened rather than threatened the institution. Looking toward the future, the foundation had been laid for continued success. The monarchy had demonstrated its capacity for evolution while maintaining its essential values and functions. Catherine's role would undoubtedly continue developing as circumstances changed, but the principles established during this period of transformation would guide future adaptations. The quiet revolution was complete. What had begun as gradual shifts in attention and responsibility had resulted in a fundamental strengthening of the monarchy for the challenges and opportunities ahead. The institution that emerged from this period of change was more responsive, more effective, and more secure in its public support than it had been for generations. In the end, the success of the transformation lay not in dramatic announcements or radical departures from tradition, but in the careful, thoughtful evolution of roles and responsibilities that served both institutional needs and individual capabilities. The monarchy had proven once again its remarkable capacity for adaptation and renewal, ensuring its continued relevance for future generations while honoring the service and sacrifice of those who had maintained it through previous challenges.